In the pale, golden hours before sleep, we wander back to the lost world of the Bronze Age, when copper and tin were first melted together and the world was remade in gleaming metal. These are not tales of conquest, but dim memories of rituals and stone of forgotten cities and the breath of distant rivers shared quietly, so that you may drift with them into the night. 1. Where the Bronze Dawn began. Imagine a horizon where stone tools give way to gleaming alloys. At the dawn of the Bronze Age, somewhere between the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE, communities discovered that copper from green-hued veins and the silvery grains of tin could be alloyed to create bronze harder, more durable, more intricate. The new metal rang when struck, casting its own note into the air. We will never know who first stirred molten copper and tin together, but across Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Indus, smiths learned the same secret and started to fashion weapons, plows, ornaments, and tools. It was as if the very bones of the earth could be coaxed into new forms. Their furnaces glowed through the long nights, illuminating rough stone walls and the astonished faces of those who saw the first bronze. Bronze changed everything. Wood and stone yielded to bronze plowshares that cut deeper into the soil, coaxing more grain from fields. Bronze blades made it possible to fell larger trees for building boats and houses. Bronze axes and hammers shaped timbers and stones. Bronze chisels carved limestone to a fine polish. The capacity to forge this alloy spurred trade over great distances because copper and tin rarely occur together. We know now that some bronze ingots came from as far away as the mountains of Sardinia and the tin-rich streams of Cornwall. Caravans and ships followed river valleys, coastlines, and mountain passes to exchange hides, wine, olive oil, spices, and jewelry for the precious metals. In doing so, they stitched together networks that transported not only goods, but ideas, art forms, and religious practices. A potter in Crete could acquire tin from Afghanistan. A scribe in Ugarit could record a treaty drawn up in Hattusa. Through bronze, the world became interdependent. With bronze came a sense of permanence. Stone tools could chip and weather, but bronze could hold an edge for years. Weapons were decorated with embossing and inlays so that utilitarian objects became works of art. Bronze bells rang across rice paddies in the east, and bronze drums thudded in the heartlands of the Americas centuries later. Each region gave the alloy its own shape. In Europe, long swords and broad-headed axes. In China, ritual wine vessels with animal masks. In the Fertile Crescent, spearheads and ornate daggers. The cast metal preserved the touch of craftsmen who have been gone for 4,000 years. When we pick up a bronze artifact in a museum, we can still see the thumbprint of its maker, still trace the lines incised with a burin, still feel the smoothness, burnished by a hand long vanished. In the quiet of our own evening, we can imagine that hand's warmth. 2. River cities and hidden script. Follow the scent of damp earth and river reeds to the Indus Valley, where one of the world's earliest urban civilizations rose on floodplains that glistened under the sun. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were not cities of towering ziggurats or pyramids. They were woven of brick and water. Their builders chose a grid of streets oriented to the cardinal directions, with narrow lanes between high walls that captured cool breezes and provided shade. Houses of baked bricks rose 2 or more stories, their walls thick enough to store the night's coolness for the heat of day. In the summer, men and women might sit on flat roofs, weaving or grinding grain while watching swallows dip over the streets. The river cities valued order. Each neighborhood had wells with spiral staircases dropping deep into the earth. Almost every house had access to water. The Great Bath, a sunken rectangle lined with waterproof bricks, lay at the heart of Mohenjo-Daro. Its floor was sealed with gypsum plaster and bitumen, and water flowed through a network of drains hidden beneath the pavement. Ritual bathing must have taken place here. silent figures descending stone steps, clay lamps flickering on ledges, the scent of jasmine drifting in from courtyards. Surrounding buildings may have been granaries, assembly halls, or priestly residences, though the city's secrets remain buried. The people of the Indus left behind thousands of seals incised with animals' unicorns, bulls, elephants, and signs that still elude decipherment. Their script looks like miniature pictures, bent lines, circles, loops, and branches pressed into soft clay before being fired. In the absence of translation, they have become like the hum of insects at night, present, patterned, but still mysterious. Mohenjo-Daro's most remarkable achievement was hidden beneath its feet, a vast drainage system. Covered brick channels carried wastewater from houses to main sewers under the streets. Bathrooms drained through terracotta pipes. Even upper-story latrines emptied into these channels. Workers could lift stone slabs to clean out blockages. This level of urban sanitation would not be matched again for millennia. There are no palaces or temples at Mohenjo-Daro that proclaim the supremacy of kings or gods. Instead, there is a civic order that speaks to a different kind of power, the power of coordinated labor and shared knowledge. The inhabitants appear to have enjoyed a relative equality, for their houses, though varied in size, share the same materials and orientation. It is easy to imagine the sound of pottery wheels turning, the creak of wooden looms, the murmur of conversation in the warm twilight. In this city of planned streets and hidden drains, life moved to the rhythms of the river and the monsoon. 3. Ziggurat steps, to heaven east of the Levant, among the marshes and reed, beds of Mesopotamia, the first cities coalesced around mud brick temples. Here, the early Sumerians built structures unlike anything seen before. Ziggurats stepped mountains of sun-baked bricks. Each was an artificial mountain topped with a temple intended to lift the priestly rituals closer to heaven. They were not places for crowds to gather, but sacred platforms for the gods' earthly abodes. The ziggurat of Ur, erected by Ur-Nammu around 2047-2030 BCE, was 5 terraces high, each smaller than the one below, so that the structure tapered upward. A monumental staircase led to the summit, where priests offered food and wine to the city's patron deity in hush and incense. From the ground, these ziggurats must have appeared as mountains emerging from the flat plains. Their surfaces were often faced with baked bricks and glazed tiles. At sunrise, shadows spilled down the stepped sides like dark waterfalls. At night, the flicker of torches from the summit would have been visible for miles across the desert. Within the city walls, scribes pressed cuneiform signs into damp clay tablets. They recorded deliveries of barley, cattle, and fish, oaths sworn between merchants, hymns to Inanna and Enlil, and the world's first known law codes. In the houses around the temple precinct, families kneaded bread dough and sang lullabies. Each ziggurat anchored its city physically and spiritually, earth touching heaven, temple meeting sky. Even after thousands of years, the mound of Ur still holds the memory of priests climbing its stairs with offerings at dawn. 4. Nile stones and pyramid shadows. South along the Nile, the Bronze World expressed itself differently. In Egypt, creation was imagined as a mound emerging from primeval waters. The first sunbird alighted on that mound, and life began. Temples were built to mirror this myth. Long avenues leading to an inner sanctum where the statue of a god rested on a raised platform. The earliest large-scale stone building on Earth is the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, designed by Imhotep for the king Djoser around 2650 BCE. It began as a simple mastaba, but grew into a 6-tiered pyramid encased in fine limestone. Around it stood a complex of courtyards, chapels, and storerooms, all enclosed within a stone wall. Rituals took place in the shadow of its steps, reenacting the king's journey to the stars. Later, pyramids at Giza and Dashur carried this symbolism further. The 3 pyramids of Khufu, Khafra and Menkaure stand like geometric mountains on the desert plateau. Their sides rise at a precise angle. Their entrances align with stars and solstice points. Nearby, the Great Sphinx gazes east with the face of a king and the body of a lion, embodying both royal and solar power. Along processional ways, priests carried sacred barks in festivals. In valley temples, offerings of bread, beer, beef, and incense were made. Pyramids were not just tombs, but stage sets for rituals that ensured the king's safe journey to the afterlife and the continued stability of the cosmos. Each pyramid complex was a microcosm: temples, causeways, boat pits, and shrines surrounded by mastaba tombs for nobles and workers. Further south at Hierakonpolis, early temple precincts reveal the roots of Egyptian religion. Excavations have uncovered ceremonial artifacts, stone maces, pottery decorated with boats and animals, and the Narmer palette, a carved shield that may commemorate unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. On a smaller scale, households had shrines with clay figurines of gods and ancestors. It is quiet to picture the soft footfall of priests moving through columned halls, the clatter of sandals on polished floors, the dim light filtering through screen walls. In the inner sanctuary, the presence of the god was tangible in darkness. To stand before a pyramid or temple today is to feel the weight of thousands of ritual acts layered like stone blocks. The bronze tools used to quarry, shape, and polish those stones have long since rusted away, but the structures endure. 5. The Labyrinth and the Minotaur. Across the Aegean Sea, on the island of Crete, bronze shone in a different light. The Minoan civilization built palaces that were labyrinthine rather than monumental vast complexes of rooms, staircases, and courtyards that grew organically over centuries. Earthquakes destroyed the first palaces sometime before 1700 BCE, but they were rebuilt grander than before. The Palace of Knossos covered 3 acres, its main building 5 acres, when outbuildings are counted. At its heart lay a central court used for ceremonies and spectacles. Living quarters, storerooms, workshops, and administrative offices radiated from this open space. Light wells pierced the roofs, allowing shafts of sunlight to illuminate frescoes of lilies, dolphins, and dancers. Knossos is associated with the legend of the Minotaur and his labyrinth. Yet what we find are not subterranean mazes, but airy halls and terraces. Horns of consecration, stylized bull horns carved from stone-crowned parapets and altars. Bulls permeated Minoan culture. Ceremonial axes depict bulls' trust for sacrifice, and Rita vessels carved as bullheads were used to pour libations of wine, honey, or perhaps blood. Wall paintings show youths grasping a bull's horns, vaulting over its back, and landing behind it, a ritual known as bull leaping. Whether such feats were performed as acrobatics, religious drama, or a symbolic dance is debated, but the image recurs across Crete. In dark storerooms at Knossos, giant pithoi jars stored oil, grain, and wine. In workshops, craftsmen cut and engraved seal stones, hammered gold sheets, and spun fine threads from wool and flax. In a corner of the palace, a small theater with seating for 400 suggests that communal performances took place. Earthquakes and fires repeatedly shattered the Minoan palaces. Around 1450 BCE, most were destroyed, leaving Knossos the last center of power until a final fire around 1350 BCE reduced it to rubble. The reasons remain unclear. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE showered ash on Akrotiri and may have disrupted agriculture and trade, but the palaces did not collapse immediately. Mycenaean influence is visible in the final phases of Knossos. In the end, the labyrinth fell silent. Bull lepers disappeared. The horns of consecration were toppled by time. Yet the legend remained and would be retold by poets who whispered that somewhere in a maze of stone, a half-man, half-bull once breathed. 6. Aegean palaces of stone. On the mainland of Greece, a harsher landscape fostered a different kind of palace. The Mycenaeans built citadels on hilltops, encircled by cyclopean walls of limestone blocks so massive that later Greeks believed giants had set them in place. These walls, up to 8 meters thick, enclosed megaron's rectangular halls with central hearths where rulers received guests and performed ceremonies. Gates were decorated with reliefs of lions, as at the Lion Gate of Mycenae. Within the walls lay grave circles where elite families were buried with gold masks, weapons, and jewelry. Outside the walls, villages spread across the hills. The Mycenaeans used bronze for weapons, armor, and chariot fittings, but their greatest administrative innovation was in writing. From around 1500 BCE, scribes at palaces such as Pylos, Mycenae, and Knossos used the linear B script to record inventories of grain, oil, livestock, and textiles. Linear B tablets were small rectangles of clay held in one hand, while a reed or stylus incised signs with the other. The script comprised syllabic signs and pictograms for commodities and numbers. Tablets recorded the distribution of wool to weavers, the allocation of bronze to smiths, and the assignments of warriors and rowers to coastal outposts. These documents were not meant to last. They were dried in the sun and stored until no longer needed. Only when palace archives burned through accident or attack were the tablets fired hard enough to survive. From them, we glimpse a society highly organized, with rulers, officials, priests, craft workers, warriors, and slaves. As with other Bronze Age powers, Mycenaean palaces collapsed around 1200 BCE. Earthquakes, internal rebellions, external invasions, and systemic breakdowns have all been suggested. We know that by the time Homer composed his epic centuries later, the citadels had become ruins, overgrown with thistles. Yet the memory of their glory remained in stories of heroes and sieges. In twilight, we can still feel the weight of those stones, the chill of corridors where scribes once pressed tablets in quiet concentration, the echo of feet passing through lion-guarded gates. 7. The Hittite mountain city journey north to the Anatolian plateau, where a line of stone walls snakes across hillsides. Hattusa, capital of the Hittite Empire, stands amid forests and rocky outcrops. King Hattusili's view. I chose this site around 1650 BCE, but the Io city reached its zenith under Suppiluliuma IV in the 14th century. At its peak, Hattusa held between 40 and 50,000 inhabitants, spread over 444 acres. Two precincts, the inner and outer city, were encircled by fortifications built of stone foundations and mud brick walls. Gates were monumental. The King's Gate, the Lion Gate, and the Yerkapi, or Gate in the Ground, built into an enormous rampart. Inside the inner precinct stood a citadel with royal residences and administrative buildings, a temple district with multiple shrines, and the Sankele, a 60-meter rock crowned by a fortress. The outer precinct contained the great temple, workshops, an industrial area, and dwellings built from timber and mud bricks. On the high point of Buyukale, the great fortress, kings dined, issued decrees, and received envoys. The city's layout reveals a sophisticated urban planning, streets oriented to cardinal directions, drainage channels, granaries, and cisterns. Beyond the walls lay terraced fields and pastures. From Hattusa, the Hittite kings ruled an empire that stretched across Anatolia and into northern Syria, challenging Egypt and Assyria for supremacy. Their scribes kept diplomatic correspondence, cuneiform tablets recording treaties, prayers, oracular prophecies, and even the terms of the peace treaty with Egypt after the Battle of Kadesh. The climate of central Anatolia can be harsh, long winters, hot summers, unpredictable rains. Yet the Hittite architects managed to harmonize their city with the terrain. They built houses partly into the slope to insulate against heat and cold. They lined storage pits with wood and clay to protect grain from moisture. They carved reliefs of gods on rocks outside the city, turning entire valleys into open-air sanctuaries. When the Bronze Age collapse came, Hattusa burned. Excavations show charred beams and smashed doorways. The population seems to have dwindled gradually. By 800 BCE, only a small Phrygian settlement remained on the site. Yet the clay tablets buried in its ruins preserved Hittite literature, myths, and laws for us to rediscover. In the hush of evening, we can imagine scribes seated cross-legged, moistening clay and pressing wedge-shaped signs as the sun set behind the mountains. 8. Through the Oxus valleys east again, across arid deserts and irrigated oases, lies the Oxus civilization, the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex. Between about 2250 and 1700 BCE, this region of modern Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and northern Afghanistan blossomed with fortified settlements. At Gonur Tepe, an almost oval citadel of 55 hectares housed a monumental palace, temples, ritual spaces, water reservoirs, and a royal necropolis. Italian archaeologists date it to roughly $2,400 1900 BCE. Others suggest 2250, 1700 BCE. The palace has rooms arranged around courtyards with altars and fire pits hinting at ritual practices. A necropolis contains hundreds of tombs with offerings of ceramics, jewelry, weapons, and ritual objects. Elsewhere in Bactria at Dashley 3, archaeologists found a rectangular compound 88 by 84 meters, fortified with massive double walls and T-shaped corridors. In the irrigated plains, farmers cultivated wheat and barley using canals drawn from rivers. They raised oxen and horses and may have domesticated camels. Models of two-wheeled carts dating to around 3000 BCE show that wheeled transport appeared early. The inhabitants crafted bronze tools, ceramics, and jewelry of semi-precious stones. Among their distinctive artworks are small statues, sometimes called Bactrian princesses, female figures carved from chlorite and limestone with wide skirts and elaborate headdresses embodying fertility and an agrarian goddess. The Oxus civilization settlements often included temples and storage buildings within concentric walls. Some suggest these fortified towns resemble later Kila forts, known from historical periods. Water played a central role. Wells, cisterns, and reservoirs collected precious rainfall. Outside the walls, artisans smelted copper and tin to make bronze. They cast axes and ornaments using techniques shared across Asia. When we picture these oasis towns at dusk, we see mud brick walls glowing in the low sun, canals shimmering, and people gathered under grape arbors. The songs they sang and the prayers they uttered have not survived, but the patterns incised on their ceramics, geometric motifs, birds, and goats echo faintly across the millennia. 9. Shang bronzes and oracle bones. In the Yellow River Valley, the Bronze Age took on another form. The Shang dynasty, which ruled from around 1600 to 1046 BCE, produced bronzes that were both ritual instruments and emblems of state power. Metallurgy here developed independently, with artisans using piece mold casting rather than the lost wax technique common elsewhere. In this method, a clay model was made, covered with a clay mold, the mold cut into sections to remove the model, then reassembled and filled with molten bronze. The technique allowed craftsmen to carve decoration directly into the mold, producing sharp reliefs. Early bronzes were utilitarian axes, knives, chariot fittings, but by the late Shang, enormous ritual vessels were cast, some weighing over 800 kilograms. The bronze vessels were used in ceremonies of sacrifice and communion with ancestors. At Anyang, the last Shang capital, more than 14 royal tombs have been excavated. The intact tomb of Fu Hao, a consort of King Wuding and a military leader, contained over 440 bronze vessels and 590 jade objects. These bronzes were placed in burials or kept in ancestral halls where offerings of meat, grain, and wine were made to spirits. Many vessels bear Tayoti masks, stylized faces with bulging eyes and horns. Their meaning is uncertain, but they may have been protective or symbolic of the communication between worlds. Other motifs include dragons, birds, bovines, and geometric patterns. The right to own bronze vessels was at first confined to the royal house, but gradually spread to regional rulers and wealthy nobles. Alongside bronze, jade carving reached a high level. Jade discs, blades, and B-rings were used in rites of sacrifice, burial, and treaty signing. Oracle bones, turtle plastrons, and ox scapulae bear inscriptions that record divinations about everything from harvests to warfare. In these inscribed characters, we find the earliest form of Chinese writing. The Shang kings believed that ancestors could influence the living, and so offerings were made with music and wine. In the capital's Erlitou, Erligang, and Anyang palaces stood with packed earth walls, wooden pillars, and thatched roofs. Wide roads led to bronze foundries and craft workshops. In the night, fires from the casting pits glowed orange, and the clang of bronze resonated across the plains. 10. Stones aligned with the sky. On a windswept plain in southern England, far from the Nile and the Yellow River, a circle of stones stands against the horizon. Stonehenge began as a timber circle and ditch around 3000 BCE, evolving over centuries into a monument of sarsen boulders and bluestones arranged in post and lintel formations. It was built in 6 stages, a labor that spanned more than a millennium. The great sarsens, up to 25 tons each, were dragged from quarries miles away, while the smaller bluestones came from the Preseli Hills of Wales. Whoever organized this undertaking commanded both technical knowledge and social influence. The effort bound communities together in planning, transport, carving, and erection. No one knows exactly what Stonehenge meant to those who raised it. Its axis is aligned on the midwinter sunset and midsummer sunrise. At the summer solstice, the rising sun appears over the heel stone. At the winter solstice, it sets between the uprights of the tallest trilithon. This alignment suggests an interest in the cycles of the sun and the agricultural calendar. The site may have been a place for communicating with ancestors, or for healing, or for forging alliances. More than 300 Barrows burial mounds dot the surrounding landscape. Excavations show that the site was used for ceremonial purposes long before the stones were erected. When we stand within the circle today, we feel the weight of deep time. Lichen clings to the stones, wind whistles through the gaps, crows circle overhead. It is easy to imagine robed figures processing between the uprights by firelight, chanting to the rhythm of drumbeats. The megalithic tradition spans Europe, from the stone circles of Avebury and the alignments at Carnac to dolmens in Ireland and Iberia. Prehistoric peoples moved stones that weighed tens of tons. Some stones were carved with spirals and cup marks. Others remained rough. Many alignments point to solstices, equinoxes, or lunar standstills. These monuments link the landscape to the sky, inviting those who walk among them to look upward. Even today, crowds gather at Stonehenge at midsummer to watch the sun rise between the stones. Each person brings their own meaning, just as those in the Bronze Age must have done. Perhaps this is the monument's greatest legacy, a place where earth and sky converse and where time itself seems to slow. 11. Trade winds. Tin routes. The Bronze Age thrived on commerce. To make bronze, copper and tin were necessary, yet they rarely occurred together. This scarcity created vast networks of exchange that linked the British Isles, Iberia, the Alps, the Levant, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Archaeologists have traced lead ingots marked with Cypro-Minoan script found near Israel back to mines in Sardinia, showing that metal moved thousands of miles across the Mediterranean. Isotopic analysis of bronze artifacts from the eastern Mediterranean indicates that tin came from far-off Cornwall and Devon in England. Copper was mined in Cyprus, the Sinai Peninsula, and Anatolia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, amber from the Baltic, ivory from Syria and Africa. Ships and caravans carried not only metals, but pottery, textiles, wine, oil, grain, and exotic animals. The Aegean was a hub of this trade. The Minoans and later the Mycenaeans acted as intermediaries, ferrying goods between Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia. Minoan merchants exported finely decorated pottery, olive oil and textiles, and imported copper ingots and tin. Egyptian tomb paintings depict Minoan traders bringing vessels, jewelry, ingots, and goat horns as gifts. At Akrotiri on Thera, frescoes show ships sailing in a flotilla, carrying grain and animals between islands. The port city of Ugarit in Syria recorded shipments of copper, tin, and luxury goods on cuneiform tablets, and its scribes wrote letters to Mycenaean kings. Even the remote Oxus civilization participated, trading lapis lazuli and precious stones along routes that would later become the Silk Road. These networks fostered not just economic exchange, but cultural syncretism. Objects found far from their origin tell tales. A Mycenaean stirrup jar in a Canaanite tomb. A Canaanite teapot shaped like a ram, buried near Megiddo. Minoan-style frescoes in Egyptian palaces. Horse-drawn chariot models in Bactria. Through trade, the Bronze Age world became a web of connections. When storms raged and ships sank, ingots spilled onto seabeds. Divers have retrieved cargoes of copper, tin, and glass from shipwrecks dating to around 1300 BCE. On land, caravans moved along dusty tracks, their animals loaded with sacks of tin and lapis lazuli. Around campfires, stories and songs would have been exchanged alongside goods. The Bronze Age world was neither isolated nor static. It pulsed with movement and barter, with trust and risk. 12. Ritual, vessels, and offerings. Ritual gave meaning to daily life. Among the Canaanites, archaeologists unearthed a 3,300-year-old tea set near Megiddo, a ram-shaped pot and small bowls that may have been used to pour milk, oil, or wine. In ceremonies, the vessel's spout emerges from the ram's mouth, and its curved horns frame a handle. It was buried intentionally with other items, suggesting a votive offering. Nearby, a rock-cut wine press dating to around 5,000 years ago shows that wine production and ritual consumption went hand in hand. In the same region, model temples carved from clay depict miniature shrines with pillars and altars, giving us a glimpse of how temples may have looked in the late Bronze Age. In Minoan Crete, bowl-shaped rite-a-drinking or pouring vessels were carved from stone or cast in precious metals. Liquid poured from the vessel's mouth would have made libations particularly theatrical. Sacrificial axes depict bulls bound and ready for slaughter. On the Hagia Triada sarcophagus, priests lead cattle to sacrifice and pour offerings into basins, while musicians played double pipes. The bull was not the only animal revered. Marine motifs like octopuses and dolphins swirl across pottery, and snakes coil around figurines of the goddess in lustral basins. In the Oxus civilization, the so-called Bactrian princesses may have been votive statuettes. They wear voluminous skirts and elaborate headdresses that blend into their hair. Their hands rest on their abdomens, emphasizing fertility. In Shang, China, massive ritual bronzes were cast to hold wine, grain, and meat for offerings to ancestors. Each vessel had a specific form and function: Lai and Ding for cooking, Guai for presenting food, Zun and Jia for heating wine. Carved jades were placed in tombs to accompany the dead into the afterlife. Across regions, the details differ, but the impulse is similar: to bridge the mortal world and the unseen through tangible objects, to pour out liquids and burn meats that the living no longer partake in, to invite ancestors and gods to share in the feast. 13. Chariots and warriors. Though this narrative drifts like smoke, we cannot ignore the sharper edges of the Bronze Age. With bronze came better weapons: spears with socketed heads, swords cast in one piece, and arrowheads that could penetrate leather armor. The chariot became the pinnacle of military technology, a light, two-wheeled vehicle drawn by swift horses. It may have been invented on the steppes and quickly adopted by all major powers. At first, oxen pulled heavy carts, as seen in models from Steppe, but the domestication of horses transformed transport and warfare. In the Near East and Egypt, chariots were manned by an archer and a driver. In Anatolia, the Hittites used heavier three-man chariots. In China, bronze fittings for chariots appear in Shang tombs. Walls and weapons speak of conflict, but Bronze Age warfare was also ritualized. In the tomb of a Mycenaean warrior, gold masks covered faces. Daggers with scenes of lions and sea battles were placed beside them. Chariot burials in the steppes of Asia show horses laid to rest alongside their masters. The great city-states and empires of the Bronze Age, Mycenae, Hattusa, Babylon, Thebes competed over trade routes and resources, forging alliances through marriage and treaties. The peace treaty carved between Ramses II and Hattusili III after the Battle of Kadesh is one of the world's earliest known international agreements, recorded in both Egyptian and Hittite. When war broke out, it was often followed by marriage alliances, gift exchanges, and ritual feasting. Violence and diplomacy were intertwined like threads in a tapestry. 14. Scripts of memory. The Bronze Age saw the blossoming of writing systems. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform evolved from pictographs pressed into clay to an abstract script of wedges and lines. Scribes used styluses cut from reed to press signs into tablet surfaces. They copied myths, hymns, laws, letters, and accounts. In Egypt, hieroglyphs combined pictorial signs and phonetic symbols carved on stone or written on papyrus. Each sign carried both sound and meaning. Scribes were trained for years to master the script. In the Aegean, Linear A and Linear B developed. Linear A remains undeciphered. Its signs were used by Minoans for administrative and ritual contexts. Linear B, used by Mycenaean Greeks, has been deciphered. Clay tablets of Linear B were small enough to be held in one hand while writing with the other. The script ran from left to right and used signs for syllables, numbers, and ideograms representing commodities. Records list grain, figs, olives, honey, livestock, textiles, and perfumes. They also note the allocation of weapons and armor, the distribution of rowers to ships, and the presence of priests and priestesses. Only a few dozen scribal hands have been identified, indicating that literacy was limited to a specialized class. When palaces burned, the clay tablets hardened and preserved their content, giving us glimpses of Mycenaean administration. Elsewhere, the Canaanites developed an alphabet of 22 letters from which Phoenician and Hebrew scripts evolved. Ugaritic cuneiform with 30 letters combines alphabetic and syllabic signs. In China, oracle bone inscriptions represent the earliest stage of Chinese writing, recording divinations and royal events. Across these regions, writing transformed memory. Instead of relying solely on oral transmission, people could now inscribe agreements, genealogies, and sacred formulas. The inscribed signs preserved not only words, but also the rhythms of thought and the priorities of society. In the stillness of night, the scratch of stylus on clay becomes like the whisper of a voice across time. 15. Celestial alignments. From the earliest times, people raised their eyes to the sky. The Bronze Age world was no exception. Mesopotamian priests watched the movements of planets and stars from atop ziggurats, linking the fates of kings to celestial events. Babylonian astronomers recorded the appearance of comets and eclipses on clay tablets. In Egypt, the heliacal rising of Sirius marked the beginning of the Nile inundation, and temples were aligned to greet the rising sun at specific times of year. At Stonehenge, the solstitial alignments framed the sun's course. In the alpine regions, rock carvings depict spirals and suns. At Newgrange in Ireland, a passage grave built before the Bronze Age admits the winter solstice sunrise, flooding its inner chamber with light. The sky provided a calendar and a canvas for myth. Constellations were seen as animals and heroes. The Pleiades signaled the time to plant, Orion the time to hunt. In China, the 28 mansions divided the sky into lunar lodges. In Mesopotamia, the zodiac took shape. The Bronze Age peoples did not separate astronomy from religion. They saw in the rising and setting of stars the stories of gods and ancestors. Festivals were timed to coincide with celestial events. The interplay of stone and sky at monuments such as Stonehenge suggests that architecture was used to bring cosmic order into earthly space. When the Milky Way arched overhead on a clear, moonless night, it must have resembled a river of light, perhaps echoing the rivers that sustained their cities below. 16. When drought and fire came around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age world staggered. Cities were burned, palaces abandoned, and populations displaced. Scholars speak of a late Bronze Age collapse. There was no single cause. Rather, a confluence of factors created a tipping point. Climate change played a part. Paleoclimate data indicates prolonged droughts in the eastern Mediterranean. Tree rings from junipers and a drop in the Dead Sea's water level reveal arid conditions. Changing wind patterns diverted midwinter storms away from the Levant, leading to repeated crop failures. This environmental stress may have undermined agrarian economies and provoked migrations. Invasions also occurred. Inscribed at Medinet Habu and elsewhere are records of mysterious sea peoples attacking Egypt and other coastal lands. These groups, possibly displaced by famine or war, raided and settled across the eastern Mediterranean. Their attacks disrupted trade and destabilized states. Some societies responded by building stronger fortifications and moving inland. Others collapsed under the pressure. The spread of ironworking, cheaper and more accessible than bronze, eroded the old balance of power. Iron-armed troops could outmatch bronze-equipped chariotry. Complex, centralized systems reliant on long-distance trade were vulnerable to disruption. When supply chains broke, elites lost resources and authority. Pandemics may have swept through populations' DNA evidence points to strains of bubonic plague. Emerging around this time, in the face of multiple shocks, the interconnected Bronze Age world fragmented. The collapse was uneven. Egypt survived, though diminished. Small regional powers arose from the ruins. In Greece, the Mycenaean palaces fell, and a centuries-long Dark Age followed. In Anatolia, the Hittite Empire vanished. The Levant saw migrations and the emergence of new polities. Memory of the old world persisted in myths and oral traditions. Homer sang of golden palaces and heroic deeds. Later Hebrews told of Canaanites and Philistines. As we consider this time of upheaval, we remember that systems, like living organisms, can reach points where complexity becomes fragility. The Bronze Age's interconnectedness, which once fostered prosperity, contributed to its demise when networks broke. 17. Echoes of lost voices. After the fires died down, silence settled over many bronze cities. Grass grew over roads. Owls nested in palace ruins. Yet people did not disappear. Pastoralists moved into once cultivated fields. Fishermen still cast nets into rivers. Farmers returned to collapsed terraces and rebuilt. Pottery styles changed. New languages emerged. Iron replaced bronze. But stories endured. Legends of golden masked kings, labyrinths and bullmen, winged bulls and giant walls were whispered by firesides. Generations who had never seen Knossos or Hattusa knew of them as places of wonder. Some of these memories were written down centuries later, others transformed into myths. The intangible heritage of the Bronze Age lives not only in museums and ruins, but in the cultural memory of humanity. If you sit quietly and let your mind drift, you may hear the voices of these ancestors. In the sound of rain on a city street, you may hear water rushing down covered drains. In the hum of traffic, the roll of bronze wheels. In the flicker of candlelight, a torch on a ziggurat stair. The lost world is not entirely lost. It remains within us, formed by our knowledge that we descend from countless unnamed hands who forged, shaped, built, and believed. 18. The Bronze Legacy. The Bronze Age's legacies are many. Its people gave us metallurgy, wheeled vehicles, sailing ships, monumental architecture, complex administration, writing, mathematics, astronomy, and long-distance trade. They explored the relationships between humans and gods, between earth and sky. They set the stage for the Iron Age and beyond. Their myths seeded later religions and literatures. The feel of cool bronze, the sound of a bronze bell, the rhythm of a potter's wheel are continuations of Bronze Age innovations. When we admire a modern city's sewer system, we echo Mohenjo-Daro. When we read a text, we continue the line that began with cuneiform and hieroglyphs. When we watch a sunrise align with an ancient stone, we share the awe felt by those who first marked solstices. It is easy to think of history as a series of bright points, pyramids, wars, inventions, but beneath the highlights lies the daily labor of countless individuals. The Bronze Age was not simply kings and priests, but farmers watering fields, weavers at their looms, sailors guiding ships by stars, mothers teaching children to speak, elders telling stories by hearths. Their names are gone, yet their acts endure in the structures and traditions we inherit. To honor them, we need not build new pyramids. Rather, we can appreciate the beauty of a well-laid brick, the elegance of a drainage channel, the craft of a carved seal. The Bronze Age is lost only if we let its traces fade from our imagination. 19. The flow of rituals, like rivers, flow through time, carrying symbols and meanings. In Bronze Age temples, incense smoke curled in shafts of light. In homes, small shrines held figurines touched by prayer. People used water, fire, music, dance, and sacrifice to communicate with forces beyond the visible. They believed that ancestors watched over them, that gods inhabited stone, tree, and star. Rituals aligned bodies with cosmic order, marking transitions, birth, puberty, marriage, death, and seasons. Though we may not share the same beliefs, we still have rituals, birthdays, weddings, graduations, seasonal festivals. They link us with community and with our past. By looking at Bronze Age rituals, we see the deep human need to create meaning through repeated symbolic acts. We realize that our own bedtime routine, lowering lights, reading or listening to a story, echoes ancient practices designed to bring peace and order to the chaos of existence. 20. The Last Light. Over the Bronze Age night has fully descended. The glow of this narrative fades like the last sun on the horizon. In your mind, perhaps you see torches flickering on ziggurat stairs, moonlight glinting on a bronze vessel, or hear the murmur of traders on a dock. The lost world of the Bronze Age is not truly lost. It lies within the ruins and in our capacity to imagine the lives of those who walked long before us. It speaks through the weight of a stone, the curve of a pottery rim, the scratch of writing on clay. It teaches us that even in a world very different from our own, people loved, hoped, struggled, and dreamed. As you close your eyes, let these images settle gently. May your sleep be as deep as the earth that shelters forgotten cities. 21. Mountains and steppe nomads and pastoralists. Beyond the walled cities and irrigated fields lay an ocean of grass and rolling hills. At dawn, the steppe glitters with dew, and the sound of horse hooves is as soft as a heartbeat. The horizon stretches in all directions without a tree or a column to anchor the eye. To many Bronze Age peoples, this open expanse was as much a home as any palace. Herding communities moved with the seasons, driving flocks of sheep, goats, and cattle across pastures that changed color with the weather. Children learned to balance on the backs of foals. Elders read the sky for signs of storms. They slept under stars far from temple lamps, watched by constellations that would later inspire myths. Their fires burned low to conserve fuel, their tents smelling of wool and smoke. The intimacy of this world is hard for us to imagine, but it was the other half of the Bronze Age. Cities depended on the products of these pastoralists: wool, dairy, hides, meat, horses, and metals carried from distant mines. The domestication of the horse transformed the relationship between humans and the land. Somewhere on the Eurasian steppe, perhaps around the Volga or Don, people learned to ride and harness horses. At first, the animals were used for meat and milk. Their bones appear in hearth trash like those of other livestock. Over time, people realized that horses could pull sledges, then wheeled vehicles. The earliest carts were heavy, four-wheeled and clumsy, but they allowed families to carry yurts and possessions across greater distances. Later, two-wheeled chariots, light and fast, would become instruments of war and prestige. In the oases of Bactria margiana, models of two-wheeled carts have been found alongside evidence of camel domestication. These findings hint at how pastoral knowledge and Bronze Age technology intertwined. Camels, with their ability to endure desert travel and carry heavy loads, opened routes across arid belts. Carts enabled the transport of water and goods between fields and pastures. Each new innovation altered the rhythms of pastoral life and the scope of trade. Nomadic and semi-nomadic groups were not isolated from the urban centers. They were part of a complex web of exchange. Pastoralists supplied wool for textiles and hides for leather. They obtained pottery, bronze tools, and grain from farmers. They also carried news. Stories, songs, and rumors moved along with herds. In this way, ideas about gods, kinship, law, and artistry traveled as surely as tin and lapis. The steppe world had its own sacred sites: standing stones, natural springs, mountain peaks where offerings were left. The wind across the grass could be a voice of a deity, the lightning on a distant horizon, a warning. Without monumental architecture, these people built their monuments in memory and ritual. They buried their dead under kurgans, earthen mounds that dot the steppe, and placed grave goods such as whetstones, ceramics, and sometimes bronze weapons. The burial mounds, like the pyramids and tombs further south, oriented the living towards the ancestors. The manes of horses were braided and adorned for ceremonies. Songs were sung to call upon spirits and to recount genealogies. Water shaped steppe life as much as the river valleys shaped agriculture. Pastoral groups followed the seasonal availability of pasture and watering holes. In dry years, they might push closer to farmed lands, negotiating grazing rights or raiding fields. In wet years, they could range further out. This mobility allowed them to survive climatic fluctuations that might devastate fixed communities. Their resilience and adaptability were strengths that complemented the fragility of sedentary societies. When drought and famine struck the Bronze Age world, nomads sometimes became raiders, but they also were traders, guides, and mercenaries. They taught cities about new animals and plants, new methods of craft, and new songs. The steppe was a highway as much as the sea. Caravans of donkeys and later camels crossed deserts and steppes, carrying copper from Anatolia, tin from Afghanistan, and jade from the Tarim Basin. The sensory experience of the steppe is different from that of walled cities. Imagine the feel of a fur cloak against your skin as you sit by a fire watching the aurora dance in winter. The taste of fermented mare's milk, tangy and effervescent, drunk from a leather bag. The smell of horse's sweat, grass, and warm animal mingled with the smoke of dung fires. The sound of flutes made from bone and drums stretched with hide. The weight of a bronze dagger on your belt, hammered from metal acquired through distant trade. The rhythm of a nomadic song, with its long lines and repetitive motifs, matches the pace of walking for days. These details remind us that the Bronze Age included many modes of life, each with its own relationship to landscape and time. Pastoralists also influenced art and mythology. In some Indo-European cultures, the sky was envisioned as a great dome through which the solar chariot traveled. The horse, sacred and strong, became associated with solar deities and heroic figures. Ritual horse sacrifices are recorded in later Vedic and Roman texts. Their roots may extend back to Bronze Age steppe traditions. Mythic themes of migration, exile, and the journey of the soul echo the lived experience of those who moved with their herds. Even the idea of the world as a journey, a path from birth to death to rebirth, may derive from this mobile outlook. In artistic motifs, horses appear not only as animals, but as symbols of speed and connection. The Bronze Age saw the spread of spiral and wheel motifs, representing the cycle of life and the turning of chariot wheels. Sometimes these symbols were incised on bone or carved into rock. Other times they were woven into textiles that have not survived. Around the edges of the steppe, where grass gives way to mountains, farmers carved terraces and built stone houses. These upland communities practiced transhumance, moving flocks between winter valleys and summer highlands. They built simple shrines at mountain passes and offered milk or grain to ensure safe crossing. The mountains were seen as the abodes of gods and ancestral spirits. Snow-capped peaks stood beyond the everyday world, a reminder of the vertical dimension of existence. In later mythologies, mountains become the homes of storm gods and cosmic trees. In the Bronze Age, they were the boundaries of the known. Pastoral groups told stories of giants, dragons, and other beings that dwelt in ravines and caves. Even as they moved across open lands, they carried within their minds a vertical geography populated by spirits and memories. When archaeologists study the steppe, they look not for cities, but for patterns of movement. They read the placement of kurgans, the distribution of pottery styles, the isotopic signatures of animal teeth. They find that pastoral life was not random, but organized along seasonal routes. They discover evidence of trade in the form of beads of Baltic amber, shells from the Indian Ocean, and bronze objects from far-off foundries. They note how chariot technology spread rapidly across thousands of miles, linking Shang China with the Near East and Europe. They observe the introduction of spoked wheels, which allowed chariots to be lighter and faster. They analyze the morphological changes in horse bones that indicate selective breeding for speed and endurance. Through this evidence, we see the steppe not as empty, but as a dynamic space that connected cultures and fostered innovation. In a dreamlike script such as this, the steppe becomes a metaphor for the mind. There are open spaces where thoughts range freely, mountains where memories cluster like clouds, rivers of understanding and droughts of forgetting. The pastoralists of the Bronze Age navigated their mental and physical landscapes with a sense of direction anchored in the stars and the passing seasons. When we lie in bed and listen to the story of their world, we can sense that same orientation. Each of us is a traveler across time and memory. The steppe reminds us that stability and change are both part of the journey, that sometimes we need to stay, other times to go, and often to adapt. In the long arc of human history, the nomads of the Bronze Age are our cousins. Their footsteps, though long faded, still mark the path. Though their lives left few monuments, the influence of pastoral peoples spread like wind across the continent. Consider the Sema Turbino phenomenon, a diffuse horizon of bronze technology and decorative styles that emerged in the forests and steppes of Siberia and spread to Europe and East Asia. This movement, which modern scholars associate with highly mobile metalworkers and warriors, demonstrates how swiftly innovations could travel when carried by riders and carts. Bronze spearheads, socketed axes, and ornate daggers share features across thousands of kilometers. Some of these artifacts were deposited in rivers or bogs as offerings. Even without castles or pyramids, mobile groups shaped the technological landscape. Their knowledge of ores, smelting, and casting was as sophisticated as that of their urban contemporaries. They adapted forms to suit their needs, creating tools that were both practical and symbolic. Their nomadic artistry reminds us that beauty can emerge in any context, not only in courts. The steppe also served as a corridor for languages. Linguists trace the spread of Indo-European languages across Eurasia, and many theories place their origin in steppe societies. Words for wheel, horse, and honey have common roots across languages as diverse as Sanskrit and Old Norse. This linguistic diffusion hints at migrations and contacts between pastoral groups and farmers. In India, the Vedic peoples who revered horses and chariots may have emerged from such interactions. In Anatolia, the Hittites spoke an Indo-European tongue while adopting urban customs. The steppe, though often portrayed as a void, was a tapestry of tribes and tongues, each contributing threads to the fabric of later cultures. As we listen to ancient poetry, we catch echoes of the steppe in metaphors of journeys, dawns, and rivers. Seasons governed pastoral time. Spring arrived with the melting of snow and the sprouting of fresh grass. Lambs were born, and foals took their first steps. Summer meant fat pastures, long days, and the time to shear sheep and collect dung for fuel. Autumn brought migration. Herds moved towards winter pastures, and people preserved meat and dairy for the cold months. Winter was a time of scarcity, storytelling, and craft. By lamplight, men and women mended harnesses, carved bone tools, wove wool into blankets. Children were taught to recite genealogies and to respect the spirits of animals. Rituals marked the turning of the seasons, dances in spring, feasts after harvest, sacrifices before embarking on long journeys. The pace was slow and cyclical, attuned to the environment. By reflecting on this rhythm, we may find calm in our own lives, attuning ourselves to natural cycles rather than the frenetic pace of modernity. Nomadic identity was fluid, yet it was also anchored in kinship. People defined themselves through relations to clan and herd rather than territory. Hospitality was sacred. Travelers were offered food and shelter, in part because any host might be a guest another day. Oral law codified obligations and rights, transmitted through elders. Justice was administered through councils, and conflicts were resolved through compensation, marriage alliances, or feuds. Music served as a repository of memory. Epic songs recounted the deeds of ancestors and explained the origins of customs. Without writing, memory and performance were crucial. The act of telling kept history alive. When we tell the story of the Bronze Age in this script, we participate in that ancient tradition of speaking the past into the present. The horizon of the steppe has no walls, but it is not without boundaries. Rivers, forests, and deserts demarcate regions. The smell of a particular herb, the taste of a well's water, the appearance of a mountain range tell a traveler where they are. Pastoralists developed mental maps based on these sensory cues. They also navigated by the stars. The North Star guided them at night, and the position of the sun at noon oriented them during the day. Children learned to recognize the patterns of the sky as they learned to walk. Stories embedded astronomical knowledge in narrative-form tales of hunters, maidens and beasts transformed into constellations. Thus, the night sky became both a guide and a storybook. In many ways, the steppe pastoralists lived lightly on the land. Their dwellings could be dismantled and moved, leaving little trace. Their herds grazed but did not plow, allowing grasses to regenerate. Their fires left ashes that the wind soon scattered. Yet the steppe is dotted with barrows, standing stones and stone circles that mark the graves of notable individuals. Some kurgans contained rich grave goods, Others are modest. These mounds hold within them the bones of men and women who rode across vast distances, who dreamed under open skies. When archaeologists excavate them, they find not only artifacts, but also traces of relationships, perhaps a woman buried with the bones of her horse, suggesting a bond stronger than death. The stillness of these graves contrasts with the movement that characterized life. In them, mobility becomes memorial. The story of the steppe does not end with the Bronze Age. In later centuries, mounted warriors from the steppe would sweep across continents, founding empires and reshaping boundaries. Scythians, Huns, Turks, and Mongols emerged from this environment. Their ancestors were the Bronze Age pastoralists who first harnessed horses and built carts. The innovations of those early nomads created possibilities that future generations would exploit. When we consider the deep roots of history, we see that the seeds of later empires were sown in the quiet labor of tending flocks and forging bronze bits. Even in the stillness of a bedtime story, we can feel the stir of hooves and the breath of horses carrying us onward through time. 22. Bactria Margiana and Hidden Oasis Civilizations. In the dry heart of Central Asia, a network of oases flourished during the Bronze Age. Where we might picture endless desert, there were once fields of wheat and barley, orchards, villages, and fortified compounds. The Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, BMAC, also known as the Oxus Civilization, rose between the Amu Darya and the Murghab rivers. At sites such as Gonur Tepe and Dashli III, archaeologists have uncovered a world of monumental architecture, ritual spaces, and water management that challenges our assumptions about early urbanism. Gonur Tepe, an ancient city in the desert of Turkmenistan, had a monumental palace, temples, ritual spaces, water reservoirs, and a royal necropolis. This complex, dated roughly 2400–1900 BCE, suggests that a sophisticated society thrived in the oasis, cultivating crops, working bronze, and practicing elaborate funerary rites. Dashli III, another site in northern Afghanistan, consisted of a large rectangular compound with double outer walls and T-shaped corridors. Its design speaks of planning and defense, of an organized community that valued protection as much as prosperity. The BMAC was not an isolated civilization, but a hub on routes linking Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Iran, the steppe, and later China. Its people irrigated fields using canals and reservoirs, harnessing seasonal floods and groundwater to grow wheat and barley. They built houses of mud brick with rooms arranged around courtyards, decorated with painted murals. Workshops produced bronze tools, ceramics, and jewelry. Women and men wore garments embellished with beads of lapis and carnelian, stones imported from distant lands. They worshipped deities represented by figurines, including the so-called Bactrian princesses, finely carved female figures wearing elaborate skirts and headdresses. These figurines may depict fertility goddesses or priestesses. Their calm faces and flowing garments suggest serenity. At Gonur Tepe, a royal necropolis contained graves with rich offerings such as silver cups, engraved seals, and bronze weapons, indicating social stratification and belief in an afterlife. Water is the lifeblood of oasis civilizations. At Gonur, archaeologists discovered large reservoirs lined with clay to store water for dry seasons. Channels carried water from the Murghab River into fields and orchards. Wells tapped underground aquifers. The sound of water flowing through a desert ditch must have been precious, like music. People in the Bronze Age would have honored the spirits of springs and wells with offerings of bread, fruit, or small figurines. Water also shaped their rituals. Perhaps in the palace temple, priests poured libations on altars to invoke the fertility of the land. Perhaps they used Ridahorn-shaped vessels similar to those of Minoan Crete, though none have been found. The dryness of the environment would have made water use sacred by necessity. The balance between storing enough water and not flooding fields required careful engineering and knowledge of seasonal patterns. The architecture of Bactria Margiana tells a story of community and hierarchy. Large compounds like Dashley III had thick double walls to defend against raiders or perhaps to demonstrate power. The walls created a sense of separation between the sacred or administrative core and the surrounding dwellings. Inside, rooms were arranged around courtyards where people worked, cooked, and socialized. Some rooms had platforms or altars suggesting ritual use. Others contained hearths and benches. The monumental palace at Gonardepe had corridors and storage rooms, signs of centralized administration. Its temple complex included a fire temple with ash layers indicating repeated burning and an inner sanctuary with altars. These spaces echo other Bronze Age religious structures: Mesopotamian ziggurats, Egyptian temples, Indus great baths. Each culture expressed sacredness in its own way, yet all used architecture to mediate between people and the divine. The economy of Bactria Margiana combined agriculture, animal husbandry, metallurgy, and trade. Archaeologists have found evidence of irrigation farming of wheat and barley, domestication of camels, and the use of two-wheeled carts. They discovered bronze tools and weapons, ceramic vessels in various shapes, and jewelry of silver and gold. Analysis of metals suggests that copper came from nearby mountains and from farther afield, while tin likely arrived via long-distance exchange. The presence of imported shells, beads, and possibly textiles indicates connections with the Indus Valley, the Iranian Plateau, and the steppe. Trade goods moved through the oases, carried by camel caravans and cart convoys. In this way, Bactria Margiana served as a conduit for ideas and materials between east and west. It was a cosmopolitan center hidden in the sands. Imagine walking along the streets of Gonardepe on a summer evening. The sun sets, turning the sky rose and gold. A breeze carries the smell of baked clay and ripening grain. Women draw water from a reservoir, their bracelets jingling softly. In a courtyard, a potter shapes a bowl on a slow wheel, his hands wet with slip. A priest lights a fire on an altar, whispering prayers to a goddess of fertility. Beyond the walls, the desert stretches, shimmering under the last light. At night, musicians gather and play flutes and frame drums, while children chase each other between mud brick walls. The stars above are the same ones that shine over Mesopotamia and Egypt, but here they are mirrored in irrigation canals. The collapse of the Bronze Age affected Bactria Margiana as well. After about 1700 BCE, many of its major sites were abandoned or transformed. Some scholars suggest climate change reduced water flow to the oases. Others point to shifts in trade routes or incursions by steppe groups. The people of Bactria Margiana did not vanish. They may have migrated or integrated with neighboring cultures, carrying with them knowledge of irrigation, metallurgy, and religion. In later historical texts, the region is mentioned as a land of rich pastures and strong horses. The memory of its palaces and temples faded into legend, yet the irrigation channels and canals may have been used for generations. Today, the archaeological remains stand under the open sky, visited by wind and occasional rain. The silence of the desert holds the echoes of voices and footsteps. The Bactrian oasis invites us to consider how human ingenuity adapts to environment. While river valleys like the Nile or Indus provided natural fertility, desert oases required intervention. The people who built canals and reservoirs in Bactria Margiana harnessed natural flows and managed scarcity. They remind us that sustainability is not a modern invention, but a human necessity. Their sculptures and figurines, with their abstract faces and elaborate costumes, show that art can flourish in unexpected places. Their story broadens our picture of the Bronze Age, revealing that between the better-known civilizations lay other centers of creativity, resourcefulness, and spirituality. The connections between Bactria Margiana and neighboring regions were not only economic, but also cultural. Seals found at BMAC sites bear motifs reminiscent of those from the Indus Valley, suggesting exchanges of ideas as well as goods. Pottery styles show affinities with Iran and the oases of Xinjiang. The presence of Indus style beads and Bactrian graves implies interpersonal contact. It is possible that merchants from Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa traveled north through mountain passes to reach these oases, following caravans of donkeys and camels. They would have encountered a landscape quite different from their floodplains: low hills, desert scrub, and fertile patches nourished by irrigation. They might have negotiated with local leaders to establish trade agreements, exchanging cotton textiles for metals, lapis for grains. Through such interactions, myths and stories would travel. The figure of a snake goddess carved in Bactria may have resonances with the serpentine motifs found on Indus seals. Perhaps a story of a serpent who guards water sources was shared across cultures, each giving it local color. The spiritual life of Bactria Margiana remains enigmatic but intriguing. The Bactrian princesses with their elaborate headdresses may represent deities associated with fertility, water, or the earth. Their hands often clasped at the chest, their eyes large and almond-shaped. They exude calm. In some depictions, a child sits on their lap, or they hold a vessel, hinting at nurturing roles. A few figurines have wings, blurring the line between human and divine. The temples at Goner Depe had altars and fire pits, suggesting rituals involving fire. The presence of water reservoirs nearby might have allowed for purification rites. Together, fire and water evoke transformation. It is tempting to imagine priests chanting by the flicker of flames, their voices low, the scent of burning herbs in the air. Perhaps they recited cosmology's stories of how the world emerged from chaos, of gods who shaped the earth and sky, of ancestors who became stars. Without written texts, we cannot know the content of these rituals, but we can sense their importance in the architecture and artifacts. One of the most compelling aspects of the BMAC is its adaptation to environmental constraints. The region experiences extreme temperature swings, scorching summers, and freezing winters. Buildings had thick walls to insulate interiors. Courtyards provided shade and airflow. Roofs may have been flat, allowing residents to sleep under the open sky on hot nights. Clothing would have been layered, with wool and linen. Diets included wheat, barley, dates, pomegranates, melons, and dairy from goats and cows. Sheep provided wool and meat. Camels domesticated here offered milk as well as transport. The ability to thrive in such an environment speaks to human ingenuity. It also invites us to reflect on our own interactions with climate. In a time of global warming, the example of Bactria Margiana offers lessons in water management, architectural adaptation, and resilience. After the decline of the BMAC, the oases did not vanish. They continued as stopping points for caravans along the Silk Roads. Later, the region saw the rise of the Kushan and Sogdian cultures, which facilitated exchanges between China, India, Persia, and the Roman world. The memory of the ancient palaces and temples may have persisted in local legends. Perhaps storytellers recounted tales of kings who ruled from stone fortresses, of treasure buried under sand, of spirits that guarded the wells. These stories would have been told around evening fires, their images mingling with the flicker of flames. In our own telling, we add another layer to this tapestry. By recalling Bactria Margiana, we recover a piece of the Bronze Age's global mosaic. 23. Storms over Thera, the volcanic eruption. Out in the Aegean Sea, a ring of islands traces the rim of a drowned volcano. Today, we know it as Santorini. In antiquity, it was called Thera. During the late Bronze Age, Thera was part of the Minoan trading network, its port of Akrotiri buzzing with merchants, fishermen, and artisans. The houses of Akrotiri were decorated with frescoes of spring flowers, dolphins, and ships. Storage jars held olive oil, wine and grain. Streets were paved, drains channeled waste away. People lived there as they did in Knossos or Mycenae, enjoying the prosperity brought by trade. Then, without warning in human terms, but with premonitions in geological time, the volcano awoke. Around 1600 BCE, one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history tore the island apart. The eruption devastated the Minoan settlements of Akrotiri, communities and agricultural areas on nearby islands, and the coast of Crete, causing earthquakes and tsunamis. Pumice and ash were thrown tens of kilometers into the air. Pyroclastic flows and waves destroyed settlements. The eruption's magnitude and its far-reaching effects were such that tephra from Thera is found in archaeological layers across the eastern Mediterranean. The eruption occurred in phases. First, earthquakes shook Akrotiri, cracking walls and causing people to flee. Thin layers of ash fell, giving residents warning. Many abandoned the town. The absence of human remains suggests a successful evacuation. Then came the main explosion, a Plinian eruption that blasted out an enormous volume of magma and created a column of ash and gas rising into the stratosphere. As the eruption continued, pyroclastic surges flowed over the island, burying buildings under meters of pumice. The sea poured into the emptied magma chamber, collapsing the volcano's center and generating tsunamis that radiated across the Aegean. Coastal settlements on Crete and other islands were inundated. The sound would have been unimaginable. Thunder upon thunder, the roar of boiling water, the howl of wind. The air filled with pumice fragments that fell like hail. Day turned to night. The eruption's immediate impact on the Minoan civilization is debated, but there is no doubt that it caused destruction and disruption. Ashfall ruined crops on nearby islands. Tsunamis destroyed harbors. The Aegean trade network, reliant on ships, would have been severely affected as harbors became clogged with debris or silt. On Crete, some coastal sites show evidence of destruction by waves. Even if the core of the Minoan palace system survived initially, the loss of outlying ports and economic connections would have weakened it. In the decades that followed, there was a shift in power in the Aegean. Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland began to dominate trade and eventually took control of Crete. The eruption of Thera thus played a role, though not necessarily the sole cause in the decline of Minoan supremacy. The environmental effects of the eruption may have extended far beyond the Aegean. Scholars have suggested that aerosols injected into the atmosphere caused a volcanic winter, leading to cooler summers and crop failures as far away as China, where the bamboo annals note unusual yellow skies and summer frost at the beginning of the Shang dynasty. Egyptian records known as the Tempest Stelae describe a great storm that some have linked to the volcanic plume. Tree ring anomalies in North America and Europe may correspond to this event. While the exact climatic impact remains debated, the eruption certainly left a geological marker horizon and cultural memories. Myths of Atlantis, of islands sinking under the sea, may echo distant memories of Thera's fate. Greek traditions of the Titanomachy, a battle of gods that shook the world, could preserve an echo of volcanic thunder. In the Hebrew Bible, the plagues of Exodus include darkness that might recall volcanic ash. Myth transforms fact into story, weaving natural disasters into cosmic dramas. The human response to the eruption is as telling as the eruption itself. The people of Akrotiri decorated their houses with vibrant art, loved beauty and nature. Facing the threat of the volcano, they listened to the Earth's warning and left. Their absence allowed their city to be preserved under ash like Pompeii centuries later. When archaeologists uncovered Akrotiri, they found furniture, pottery, and frescoes intact, offering a window into everyday Bronze Age life. The colors of the frescoes, reds, blues, ochres, still shine. On one wall, lilac blossoms sway gently. On another, ships sail between islands. These images whisper of a world connected by sea, rich in imagination. The eruption preserved not only destruction, but also beauty. As we contemplate Thera from our beds, the sound of distant traffic might become the hiss of steam, the glow of a lamp, the red of molten lava. The story of Thera is a reminder that human cultures exist within geological time. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and climate shifts can shape history as much as kings and queens. Yet the eruption also invites reflection on resilience. The Minoans did not vanish overnight. They adapted, and their artistic legacy persisted. The sea that destroyed also connects, carrying trade and memory. The volcano that buried Akrotiri preserved it. Destruction and preservation danced together, like fire and ash. Long after the eruption, the caldera of Santorini filled with seawater, and new volcanic cones emerged. Fishermen sailed across this bay unaware of the cataclysm beneath. On the island's cliffs, vineyards now grow in soil enriched by volcanic ash, producing wines with notes of citrus and salt. Tourists photograph sunsets over the caldera. Life returns to places of disaster. This transformation illustrates a fundamental rhythm. Endings become beginnings. The eruption that devastated Akrotiri also created new landforms and enriched soils. The memory of the disaster fades, but the landscapes it shaped endure. For those of us listening at night, this is a comforting thought. Our own crises may leave scars, but they may also lead to renewal. Legends of sunken islands and lost cities occur worldwide. Plato's story of Atlantis may be the most famous. He described a powerful island civilization that fell beneath the waves. While scholars debate whether he drew upon memories of Thera or Minoan Crete, the psychological resonance of a flourishing world suddenly destroyed is universal. It speaks to the human awareness of impermanence. In many cultures, myths of destruction are paired with myths of recreation. The world is flooded, then a god sends a bird to find land. A mountain is uprooted, then a new mountain rises. The story of Thera fits into this pattern. By telling it slowly, we participate in the ancient practice of using narrative to cope with uncertainty. The volcano's roar becomes a lullaby when set to the tempo of breathing. The art of Akrotiri offers glimpses into Minoan spirituality. Frescoes depict saffron gatherers, blue monkeys, griffins, and priestesses performing rituals. Some scenes show a young woman in a flowing robe climbing a rocky path towards a temple, perhaps enacting a rite of passage. Others show ships sailing past islands, their sails billowing. The naturalistic style, vibrant colors, and dynamic composition convey a joy in life and nature. There is an absence of fear in these images. They celebrate fertility, abundance, and beauty. This makes the eruption's devastation all the more poignant. The people who created those frescoes loved their world, yet it was taken by forces beyond their control. Today, the preserved paintings speak across millennia, inviting us to share in their wonder. Modern science has given us tools to study ancient eruptions. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica contain layers of volcanic ash. By analyzing chemical compositions, researchers can link these layers to specific eruptions. Tree rings show growth, anomalies that may correspond to years of cooler temperatures. Radiocarbon dating of organic material trapped in tephra helps narrow down dates. These methods, combined with archaeology and ancient texts, form a multi-dimensional picture of the past. When we include such details in a bedtime story, we merge myth with science. We recognize that understanding comes from multiple sources: the story, the artifact, the laboratory measurement. Each mode of knowing adds depth. Finally, Thera teaches us humility. Human societies can achieve great feats, palaces, frescoes, trade networks, but they remain vulnerable to natural forces. This vulnerability is not a weakness, but a reality. Recognizing it can inspire respect for the earth and caution in our actions. Ancient peoples responded to volcanoes with prayer and myth. Modern ones respond with monitoring and evacuation plans. yet both are attempts to live with the dynamic planet we inhabit. As we fall asleep, we can imagine a volcano rumbling beneath us, not with fear, but with awe. We are part of a living earth that breathes fire and ash, water and wind. Our stories are part of its story. 24. Bronze and ancestral rituals in China. While the Mediterranean world built pyramids and ziggurats, the early Chinese states of the Shang and Zhou dynasties developed their own distinctive Bronze Age culture. Their cities were not as monumental as those of Egypt or Mesopotamia, but their bronzes were unparalleled in artistry and technique. Archaeologists have discovered tombs filled with bronze vessels, jade ornaments, and bone carvings. The tomb of Fu Hao, a consort of King Wu Ding, contained more than 440 bronze vessels and 590 jade objects. These objects were not merely decorative, they were used in sacrificial ceremonies to honor ancestors and deities. The right to cast and possess bronze vessels was initially reserved for the royal house, but over time, nobles and officials also gained this privilege. Ownership signaled status and participation in ritual life. Chinese bronze casting differed from the lost wax technique used in other regions. Artisans employed piece mold casting. They shaped a model of the desired vessel, covered it with clay to create a mold, cut the mold into sections, removed the model, and then reassembled the mold to receive molten bronze. This technique allowed for intricate designs and sharp reliefs. The surfaces of Shang bronzes are covered with motifs such as taoti, a stylized animal mask with prominent eyes, horns and fangs flanked by dragons, birds, and geometric patterns. The taoti's exact meaning remains debated. It could represent protective spirits, ancestral faces, or symbolic narratives. The symmetrical arrangement and repetition of motifs create a rhythm on the vessel, turning a practical object into a cosmic map. Some bronzes have inscriptions naming their owners or recording events. The vessels were used to hold wine, food, or water during rituals. After use, they were buried with their owners to serve them in the afterlife. Different shapes of bronze vessels served specific functions. Tripod ding were used for cooking and offered to ancestors. Gai bowls held grain. Jia had legs and spouts for heating liquids. Zun were tall wine containers. The variety of shapes reflects a structured ritual system in which each vessel corresponded to a step in the ceremony. Some bronzes weigh hundreds of kilograms. A few large vessels from the later Zhou period weigh over 875 kilocular. To cast such objects required large amounts of copper, lead, and tin, coordinated labor, and careful control of temperature. The process itself may have been considered sacred. Smelting furnace, molten metal glowing orange, the hiss as bronze poured into molds. The scent of clay and metal filled the air, the heat like summer sun. When the bronzes cooled and the molds were broken away, the newly born objects shone. Craftsmen polished them to a dark luster, then incised patterns. Jade held a special place in Chinese Bronze Age rituals. Long before the Shang, Neolithic peoples prized jade for its hardness and translucence. Jade discs, bi, and tubes, kong, were buried with the dead, symbolizing heaven and earth. In the Bronze Age, jade ornaments and weapons accompanied bronzes in graves. The cool smoothness of jade under the hand, its weight and subtle colors, gave it an aura of purity. Jade was thought to contain the quintessence of mountains and rivers. To carve it required skill and patience. Artisans used string saws and abrasives to shape the stone. Jade axes and knives may have served ritual rather than practical purposes. Their edges were never sharpened. In the tomb of Fu Hao, dozens of jade objects lay arranged around her coffin, signifying her power and the respect accorded to her ancestors. The Shang kings practiced divination using oracle bones. Shoulder blades of oxen or plastrons of turtles were cleaned, inscribed with questions about harvests, warfare, or the weather, then heated until they cracked. Diviners interpreted the crack patterns as answers from the ancestors or deities. The inscriptions include the date, the diviner's name, and the outcome, providing us with a chronicle of royal concerns. These bones are the earliest known stage of Chinese writing. The characters engraved on them evolved into the logographic script still used today. Like cuneiform and hieroglyphs, these marks represent a leap from spoken language to tangible signs that persist across time. They speak of a society deeply concerned with the will of unseen powers and with recording the acts of kings. The layout of early Chinese cities such as Erlitou and later Anyang reveals planning and social organization. Foundations of palaces, workshops, and storage areas have been found, along with tombs for elites and commoners. Anyang, the last Shang capital, contained bronze foundries where molds and casting debris lie scattered. The noise of these workshops must have been intense, the roar of furnaces, the clang of tools, the shout of workers. Within the city, ancestral temples housed bronze vessels on stands, their surfaces gleaming in the dim light. The smell of fermented millet wine and burnt animal fat filled the air during ceremonies. Musicians played bells and drums to accompany rituals, their rhythms echoing the patterns incised on bronzes. Outside the city, farmers grew millet and wheat, herders tended pigs and cattle, and soldiers trained with bows and spears. The early Zhou dynasty inherited Shang rituals, but shifted emphasis towards the mandate of heaven, a concept that moral behavior and righteous rule justify authority. Bronze inscriptions began to include moralizing messages and praise of virtue. The casting of bronzes remained a prerogative of nobles, but gradually diffused to lesser lords. As regional states grew more independent, they commissioned their own bronzes, each inscribed with genealogies or achievements. The bronzes thus served not only religious but also political functions. They legitimized claims to land and office. In some sense, they were like documents, yet their presence in rituals elevated legal matters to sacred status. Imagine attending a Shang ritual at night. The temple courtyard is lit by torches. Bronze vessels are arranged on an altar. The officiant, wearing a headdress of feathers and jade, pours wine from a zun into a ding, murmuring prayers to ancestors. The wine steams as it hits the hot vessel. Musicians strike bronze bells, their tones resonant and deep. Dancers move slowly, their silk sleeves trailing. The smell of meat cooking rises from another ding. After the ceremony, the vessels are cleaned, then returned to a storeroom. They will be used again at the next festival, or buried when the owner dies. In the stillness afterwards, the bronzes sit in the darkness, holding within them the echoes of voices and the taste of wine. The Chinese Bronze Age teaches us that technological mastery can serve a spiritual purpose. The complexity of piece mold casting, the resources mobilized for tombs, the artistry of motifs were all directed towards honoring ancestors and maintaining cosmic order. When we see a Shang bronze in a museum, we might admire its form and pattern, but in its original context, it was part of a conversation between worlds. In our own lives, the objects we treasure, a family heirloom, a simple cup, carry memories and connections. They may not be bronze, but they hold a similar weight. The Bronze Age invites us to consider how the things we make can become vessels of meaning. The evolution of Chinese bronze production mirrored changes in society. During the Shang dynasty, bronze casting was controlled by the royal family and used primarily for ritual. As power shifted in the Zhou period, bronze inscriptions became longer and more personal, recording deeds and virtues. Some bronzes include accounts of military campaigns, grants of land, and genealogies. The objects were both sacred and administrative. They served as contracts between rulers and vassals, inscribed in metal to endure. This blending of spiritual and secular functions reflects the Zhou concept of the mandate of heaven, which tied moral behavior to political legitimacy. When a ruler failed in virtue, heaven withdrew its support and a new dynasty could arise. Bronze vessels thus became symbols of rightful authority. Their weight and durability embodied the weight and durability of moral order. The craftsmen who cast these bronzes belonged to specialized guilds. They passed down knowledge through apprenticeships, guarding techniques as secrets. The piece mold method required precise control of clay and metal. Workers kneaded clay to the right consistency, shaped models, carved patterns in negative into mold pieces, and aligned them with dowels. They prepared the alloy by combining copper with tin and sometimes lead, controlling the temperature of furnaces through bellows. They poured molten metal into molds at the right speed to avoid bubbles. They waited, then removed the mold to reveal the finished piece. After cooling, they polished and engraved inscriptions. Each step demanded skill, patience, and experience. The workshop would have been hot, noisy, and dim, the only light coming from the fire and the molten metal. Outside, rituals awaited the new vessel, connecting the labor of craftsmen to the beliefs of the elite. Bronze was not the only medium of spiritual expression. Silk textiles, now rarely preserved, likely bore painted or embroidered cosmological designs. Lacquered wood, bone, and pottery also carried symbols. Music played a crucial role in rituals. Sets of tuned bells, bianzhong, and stone chimes, qingxi, were hung on wooden frames and struck to produce melodies. The inscriptions on some bells include musical notations. Scholars have reconstructed ancient pieces, revealing pentatonic scales, similar to those used in Chinese music today. The combination of bronze vessels, jade ornaments, oracle bones, bells, and chimes created multi-sensory ceremonies. Participants saw gleaming surfaces, smelled offerings, tasted food and wine, heard music, and felt the cool of jade. The integration of senses elevated the ritual beyond the ordinary, binding community through shared experience. Contacts between the Chinese Bronze Age and other regions are still being explored. Some metallurgical techniques may have traveled along steppe routes or through Central Asian oases. The similarity between certain Shangtaoti motifs and Scythian animal-style art suggests distant connections. Jade from the Khotan area in western China reached Anyang, indicating long trade routes. Conversely, Chinese bronzes did not travel widely. They were rarely found outside East Asia. The Bronze Age world was thus a tapestry of overlapping networks. Some goods moved great distances, others remained local. This pattern reminds us that globalization is not an all-or-nothing phenomenon. Connections can be selective, shaped by cultural values and practical constraints. The transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age in China did not follow the collapse pattern seen in the Eastern Mediterranean. Instead, iron casting gradually complemented bronze. Ritual bronzes remained important even after iron tools became common. The continuity of ritual speaks to the enduring importance of ancestors and cosmic order in Chinese thought. Later, Confucianism and Taoism would emerge from this cultural soil, emphasizing harmony, hierarchy, and natural balance. When we place a quiet cup of tea on a table or bow to an ancestor's portrait, we continue practices that have deep roots. The Chinese Bronze Age invites us to slow down and honor the past with mindful gestures. As the Zhou dynasty progressed, the central authority weakened. Regional lords became increasingly autonomous, leading to the Spring and Autumn period and later the Warring States era. During these centuries, bronze technology continued to evolve. Weapons such as swords, spearheads, and arrowheads became more standardized. Decorative bronzes displayed new motifs, including interlocking dragons and geometric bands. Bronze coins in various shapes, knife money, spade money were cast and used in markets. Scholars and philosophers traveled from court to court, offering advice on governance and ethics. Confucius, Mencius, Laozi, and Zhuangzi lived in this dynamic time. Their teachings reflected a world in flux, yet they drew upon earlier ritual concepts. The idea that proper ritual conduct, could harmonize society owes much to Bronze Age traditions of ancestor worship and cosmic order. In this way, the material culture of bronze influenced the immaterial culture of thought. Archaeological discoveries in recent decades continue to reshape our understanding of the Chinese Bronze Age. Excavations at Sangqingdui in Sichuan revealed enormous bronze masks and statues unlike any known from the Shang heartland. These bronzes feature protruding eyes, intricate headdresses, and enigmatic expressions. Scholars debate their meaning. Perhaps they represent gods or ancestors, perhaps shamans. They suggest that multiple centers of bronze production existed, each with distinct styles and beliefs. The diversity within Bronze Age China mirrors the diversity across the wider Bronze Age world. Just as Minoan, Hittite, and Indus cultures differed, so too did Shang, Shu, and other Chinese states. These differences enrich the tapestry of human history. The thought that many Bronze Age peoples created art and ritual in parallel invites us to imagine a chorus of cultures, each singing its own song. Chinese myths from later periods may preserve memories of the Bronze Age. Tales of the sage Yu the Great, who controlled floods by dredging channels, resonate with the engineering feats required for irrigation and flood management. Stories of the 9 cauldrons bronze vessels cast by the first Zhou kings to symbolize their dominion over the 9 provinces reflect the political and ritual significance of bronze. Legends of dragons controlling rainstorms might echo the importance of weather to agrarian societies. Even the story of the Jade Emperor presiding over heaven and earth may be rooted in the early association of jade with cosmic power. When we read these myths, we can sense the Bronze Age behind them, like a mountain range hidden in mist. Finally, the sensory aspects of Chinese Bronze Age life deserve contemplation. Imagine the feel of packed earth under bare feet in a courtyard of Anyang, the warmth of the sun on a tiled roof, the taste of steamed millet and roasted pork served from a bronze vessel, the smell of damp earth after rain, the sound of pigs grunting in pens, and the chatter of children. Inside a temple, incense smoke curls upwards, catching the light. A priest cracks an oracle bone, the fire pops, and the bone emits a faint odor. The crack appears. He reads it aloud. Outside, a bronze worker fans a furnace, sweat dripping down his face. Sparks fly. A potter spins a wheel, shaping clay with wet hands. In the evening, families sit together, telling stories. The world is alive with texture, scent, and sound. When we imagine these details, the Bronze Age becomes not just a concept, but a place we can inhabit in our minds. 25. Stone circles. The European Bronze Age. Far to the west, on misty islands and windswept peninsulas, other communities raised stones and traced paths of the sun. Stonehenge in southern England stands as the most famous of these monuments. It was constructed in stages between about 3000 and 1520 BCE. The earliest phase consisted of a circular earthwork with a ditch and bank. Later, massive upright stones known as sarsens were transported from the Marlborough Downs and arranged in a horseshoe and circle. Smaller bluestones were brought from Wales over 200 kilometers away and erected within the sarsen circle. The monument aligns with the sunrise at the summer solstice and the sunset at the winter solstice. These alignments suggest that Stonehenge was used to mark the turning points of the year. Nearby burial mounds and other stone circles indicate that the whole landscape was a ceremonial complex. The purpose of Stonehenge and other stone circles remains a subject of debate. They may have been temples, astronomical observatories, burial monuments, or places of healing. Some scholars propose that Stonehenge served as a meeting place for communities, a neutral ground where disputes were settled and alliances formed. Others see it as a site for rituals related to death and the ancestors. Whatever its original function, it required enormous labor. The sarsen stones weigh up to 25 tons each. Moving them would have involved hundreds of people, sledges, ropes, perhaps wooden rollers. The bluestones, though smaller, traveled across rivers and hills. The collective effort speaks of a society capable of mobilizing labor for communal projects and of a shared belief in the significance of aligning stone and sky. Across Europe, the Bronze Age left other marks. In the Noricum and Unetite cultures of Central Europe, elites were buried under barrows with bronze weapons, gold ornaments, and amber beads. The Nebra sky disk, found in Germany and dated to around 1600 BCE, depicts the sun, moon, and stars on a bronze plate. In the Iberian Peninsula, people built megalithic tombs and carved stelae depicting warriors with helmets and swords. In Scandinavia, the Nordic Bronze Age produced rock carvings of ships, spirals, and sun symbols, and hung bronze trumpets in bogs. The Atlantic coast from Brittany to Ireland is dotted with stone rows and circles, such as the Karnak alignments. These monuments predate the classical Bronze Age, but were still venerated. In Ireland, the passage tomb of Newgrange admits the winter solstice sunrise, illuminating its inner chamber with a beam of light. The interplay of stone and sun, earth and sky, is a recurring theme. Daily life in Bronze Age Europe was centered on farming, herding, and metalwork. Communities cultivated barley, emmer, and flax. They kept cattle, pigs, and sheep. They lived in roundhouses or longhouses built of timber, thatch, and clay. They wove textiles, made pottery, and traded amber, tin, and copper. Bronze tools and weapons were treasured. Axes, swords, and spearheads were cast in stone molds and polished to a sheen. Some were used, others were deposited in rivers and bogs as offerings. The act of casting bronze was accompanied by ritual. Metal workers might have been regarded as special, their craft seen as transformative, turning stone into metal as if by magic. Songs and stories told of smith gods and heroes with shining weapons. In these northern lands, the seasons are pronounced. Long summer days give way to long winter nights. The light changes color, and the air tastes different. People watched the sun's path closely, for it signaled when to plant, harvest, and gather for ceremonies. The alignment of monuments like Stonehenge with solstices and equinoxes speaks to this attentiveness. Imagine standing within the stone circle on midwinter's evening. The air is cold. Breath hangs like smoke. A crowd gathers, faces turned towards the west. As the sun sinks, its last rays pass through the trilithon and strike an inner stone. A cheer or a chant rises. Perhaps a fire is lit. Perhaps offerings are made. The darkness that follows is deep, but hearts are lifted with the knowledge that the sun will return. Monuments are only one part of the story. Bronze Age Europe saw technological and social innovations that shaped later history. The use of bronze tools increased agricultural productivity. The plow, improved with metal parts, opened heavy soils. Sickles and scythes allowed harvests on a larger scale. Metal axes cleared forests. Woodworkers crafted boats to navigate rivers and coasts, enabling trade and fishing. Fortified settlements appeared on hilltops and promontories, sometimes with stone or timber walls. These sites served as centers of production, storage, and defense. The layout of houses and workshops reveals social stratification. Some dwellings were larger, with access to prestige goods. Grave goods also reflect hierarchy. A chieftain's burial might include a bronze sword, a gold torque, amber beads, and a wagon, while common graves contained simple pottery and tools. But status was not only material, it was also tied to ritual roles. Individuals who could mediate with the divine shamans, seers, bards, held power. The Nebra sky disk, discovered in Germany, exemplifies the sophistication of European Bronze Age cosmology. This bronze disk, inlaid with gold symbols representing the sun, moon, and stars, may have been used as an astronomical instrument. Its design suggests knowledge of the lunar cycle and the need to reconcile lunar and solar calendars. The disk also depicts a boat, hinting at beliefs about the sun's journey across the sky and under the earth. The presence of this object in a burial mound implies that knowledge of the heavens was associated with authority. When we think of Bronze Age Europeans, we should envision not only warriors with swords, but also astronomers watching the stars. Contact with distant regions enriched European societies. Baltic amber traveled south to Mycenae and Crete. Mediterranean pottery reached northern shores. Tin from Cornwall was shipped through Gaul to the Mediterranean. Trade routes crisscrossed the continent, following rivers and coastal currents. These routes were dangerous but rewarding. Traders faced storms, pirates, and unfamiliar customs. Yet they returned with goods and stories. Myths of distant lands with golden apples or silver rivers may have originated from travelers' tales. The exchange of goods also entailed the exchange of ideas. Metalwork styles, motifs, and techniques spread, influencing local traditions. The swirling designs on Celtic bronze and the geometric patterns of Hallstatt swords have antecedents in earlier periods. In this way, Europe was part of the Bronze Age network, though at its edges. The relationship between humans and landscape was central to European Bronze Age spirituality. Sacred groves, springs, and mountains were revered. Offerings of weapons and jewelry were placed in bogs and rivers, perhaps to appease water deities. Caves were used for rituals. Rock paintings in caves depict animals and abstract symbols. Stone circles might have been considered as doorways between worlds or as calendars. The act of moving through these landscapes was itself ritualized. Processions along avenues of stones or pilgrimages to mountain shrines reinforced community bonds. The cycles of nature, sunrise and sunset, solstices and equinoxes, the waxing and waning moon were integrated into ceremony. Such practices remind us that spirituality can be embedded in the very act of walking and observing. Stone circles also served as markers of community identity. Each region developed its own styles and rituals. Some circles are simple rings. Others have avenues of standing stones or central cairns. They may have been built to commemorate a particular event or to honor a lineage. The process of building would have been communal and could have taken years. Generations would see a monument being raised. Thus, the stones connect the living with ancestors and descendants. Even after the Bronze Age ended, later peoples reused or respected these sites. In medieval times, farmers plowed around the stones. In modern times, we visit them as heritage sites. Their endurance across millennia invites contemplation of time itself. As with other Bronze Age cultures, the European experience was not only about elites and monuments. It was about everyday acts: digging a ditch, weaving a cloak, baking bread, singing a lullaby. It was about weather rain that could ruin a harvest or bring relief, frost that could kill cattle, wind that could drive ships. It was about community, festivals where meat was shared, disputes resolved, marriages arranged. The stone circles and bronze treasures are visible to us because they lasted. The songs and stories have mostly vanished. Yet in the stillness of a modern night, we can imagine the hum of voices around a fire, the crackle of burning wood, the flicker of light on faces. The European Bronze Age was not a distant world of savages or barbarians, but a rich tapestry of people living close to earth and sky, forging meaning through stone, metal, and ritual. The end of the European Bronze Age was gradual and varied across regions. In parts of the Mediterranean, the late Bronze Age collapse brought turmoil. In northern Europe, climatic changes and social shifts led to transformations in settlement patterns and technology. Iron gradually replaced bronze for tools and weapons. Wooden structures replaced stone monuments. Trade networks shifted, yet continuity remained. Burial traditions evolved but persisted. The cultivation of barley and wheat continued. Myths of ancestral heroes lingered. Later, Celtic cultures drew upon Bronze Age foundations, weaving new stories around old stones. This continuity amidst change is a hallmark of human history. Societies adapt without severing roots. When we face changes in our own lives, We can look to the Bronze Age for inspiration, to be resilient and to honor the past even as we embrace the future. Bronze Age Europeans observed the night sky with keen interest. They noticed the movement of planets against the stars, the regularity of eclipses, and the path of comets. They may have used simple instruments sighting stones, wooden posts to mark positions of celestial bodies. The Nebra sky disk suggests a sophisticated understanding of the lunar and solar cycles. Alignments of standing stones with lunar standstills, such as those at Callanish in Scotland, indicate that the moon held ritual significance. Stories of lunar goddesses and solar chariots could have their origins in these observations. The interplay between observation, myth, and ritual created a cosmology that connected human life to the heavens. When we look up at the stars today, we continue a practice thousands of years old. Our names for constellations may differ, but the act of finding meaning in the sky is the same. Metalworking in Bronze Age Europe was both practical and symbolic. Swords were not simply weapons, they were objects of prestige, sometimes given names and passed down through generations. Axes and sickles served daily needs, but were also deposited as offerings in rivers. The act of casting metal involved elements of performance. The founder prepared the molds, melted the alloy, and poured it with ritual words. The moment the bronze solidified was akin to birth. In some cultures, women played roles in metalworking, controlling aspects of resource procurement or decoration. Jewelry such as torques, arm rings, and lunulae adorned bodies in life and in death. These objects signified identity and status. When we consider the labor that went into mining ore, transporting it, smelting it with charcoal, and crafting objects, we gain appreciation for the social organization of Bronze Age communities. They coordinated labor, shared skills, and celebrated the results. Environmental consciousness may have been part of Bronze Age European life. Wood was needed for fuel and construction. Overuse could lead to deforestation. Communities managed woodland through coppicing and selective cutting. Heathlands and moors may have been created by burning forests to create pasture. Water management was crucial. Channels and ditches drained wetlands and irrigated fields. People read the landscape soil types, water flow, plant growth to decide where to settle and farm. They also observed animals and weather patterns. This attentiveness fostered a sense of reciprocity with the land. Offerings in bogs and wells were not only to gods, but also to the waters themselves. When we think about sustainability today, we can look back to these ancient practices for wisdom. They remind us that living within environmental limits is a long-standing human challenge. When we include these northern landscapes in our meditation, the Bronze Age becomes global. From the deserts of Bactria to the oases of Egypt, from the steppes of Eurasia to the meadows of Britain, human beings responded to their environments with creativity. They built monuments to measure time, they cast metal to honor gods, they told stories about creation and catastrophe. In the quiet of the night, as we drift towards sleep, we can feel the connections, the weight of a stone in the hand, the smell of rain on dry earth, the joy of seeing the sun return after winter, the sorrow of watching a community destroyed by fire or flood. The Bronze Age lives not only in museums, but in the collective human memory. By listening to its echoes, we honor the depth of our past. The threads of Bronze Age life weave together into a tapestry that stretches across continents. Imagine standing at a crossroads where a trader from the Indus Valley meets a nomad from the steppe, a priest from Thebes, a sailor from Crete, and a bronze caster from Anyang. They share no common language, yet they recognize the glint of metal, the aroma of spices, the symbol carved into a seal, the gesture of pouring a libation. Each brings a story of rivers and mountains, of gods who ride chariots or dwell in pyramids, of cities with drainage systems and palaces with frescoes. They sit by a fire, exchange gifts, and learn a few words. In the morning, each returns to their world, but they carry with them a piece of another. Through such encounters, the Bronze Age became interconnected. We cannot point to one center. Rather, there were many nodes in a network of trade and ideas. Recognizing this multiplicity allows us to appreciate the richness of the past. From a modern perspective, it is tempting to categorize and compare. Which civilization was the most advanced? Which collapse was the most catastrophic? Yet the Bronze Age resists simple ranking. Its value lies in its diversity. The Indus people built cities with covered drains and standardized bricks. The Sumerians invented writing and law codes. The Egyptians aligned pyramids with stars. The Minoans painted dolphins and built palaces with light wells. The Mycenaeans inscribed tablets and erected cyclopean walls. The Hittites codified treaties and corresponded with pharaohs. The Shang cast vessels of exquisite complexity. The Bactrians irrigated deserts and carved serene figurines. The inhabitants of Britain hauled stones across moors to mark the solstices. Each responded to local conditions and needs, yet each tapped into universal human desires: to organize society, to honor ancestors, to understand the cosmos, to express beauty, to ensure survival. By holding these stories together, we see the Bronze Age as an exploration of what it means to be human. As we approach the end of this journey, let us linger on the sensory world we have visited. Feel the cool clay of a seal in your palm, incised with a script you cannot read. Smell the resinous smoke of incense in a temple deep within a pyramid complex. Hear the distant calls of herders on a hillside, guiding sheep with whistles. Taste the slightly sour milk from a goat offered by a pastoralist as hospitality. See the glare of sunlight on the sea as a ship rounds a headland, its sail taut with wind. Touch the smooth surface of a jade disc buried with a king. The Bronze Age was a time of sensation. For its people, the world was alive with gods, spirits, and ancestors. Mountains were more than rock, rivers more than water, metals more than minerals. Every object had a story, every ritual a purpose. When we immerse ourselves in these sensations, we connect with them across time. Memory is not passive, it is an act. The Bronze Age is not only what happened between certain dates, it is how we remember and interpret those happenings. For centuries, people forgot the Indus script, lost track of the Minoan language, and misattributed bronze axes to giants. Only in the last 200 years have archaeologists and linguists begun to piece together this era. The process is ongoing. Each new discovery, an inscription, a tomb, a DNA sequence, adds nuance. Each new interpretation changes the story. As listeners, we participate in this unfolding. We are not receiving a fixed tale, but engaging with a living one. Our imagination fills gaps. Our emotions connect us to strangers. In telling the Bronze Age as a bedtime story, we invite it into our personal narratives. It becomes part of who we are. What lessons can we take from this deep past? Perhaps the most basic, that complexity and fragility coexist. The same networks that allowed tin from Cornwall to reach Anatolia made palaces vulnerable to disruptions. The same climate that fostered agriculture could withhold rain and cause famine. The same craft that produced bronze swords for protection could produce weapons of conquest. We learn that resilience requires diversity, that adaptability is vital, that no society is immune to change. We also learn that beauty and meaning can emerge even in precarious conditions. The frescoes of Akrotiri were painted on walls built atop a volcano. The ziggurats of Ur rose in a floodplain threatened by drought. The giant stones of Stonehenge were erected on lands subject to storms. In our own world, facing environmental and social challenges, we can find hope in the Bronze Age's creativity. Finally, we come back to the personal. The Bronze Age was full of individuals whose names we do not know, but whose presence we can feel. A potter pressed their fingers into clay, a scribe sharpened a reed, a child chased a goat, a mother sang a lullaby, a carpenter carved a wheel. These everyday acts created the foundations upon which civilizations were built. In our own lives, small actions matter. turning off a light to save energy, planting a seed, teaching a child a song, these are our rituals. By performing them with care, we honor those who came before us. We join the continuity of human experience. As you lie in the dark listening to these words, you join an ancient chain of listeners. Someone once told a story by firelight to help a loved one fall asleep. That story may have been about gods and heroes, about rivers and mountains. Our story tonight is about them and about us. It is about the lost world of the Bronze Age and the not lost world we inhabit. As you close your eyes once, again, let the images of steppe riders, oasis palaces, erupting islands, bronze rituals, and stone circles merge into a single dreamscape. The lost world of the Bronze Age is a quilt of landscapes and cultures stitched together by trade and story. Its colors are muted by time but still vibrant. Its textures of metal, stone, water, and flesh are layered. The people who shaped this world are gone, but their hands continue to guide ours through the tools we use, the words we write, and the rituals we observe. When you drift into sleep, imagine yourself walking through those ancient spaces. Feel the sun on your back and the cool of water on your fingers. Hear the distant sound of a bronze bell and the rustle of grass. Smell the smoke of a hearth. Taste the sweetness of dates or the tang of fermented milk. Let the journey continue beyond words. Good night.